The situation continued to worsen, little by little, for a few months. Sunny, Nephice, and Cassie had played their cards well, managing to avoid major losses. However, it was hard to call their achievement a triumph. If anything, it resembled a controlled fall. The human domain had reached the bottomless abyss and was now careening dangerously on its very edge, slipping lower and lower with each day. There were more nightmare gates. Abominations continued to threaten the southern coast of the western quadrant, and were already drawing close to the remaining cities in the eastern quadrant. The settlements in South America had to be evacuated, dealing a blow to the food supply across both the waking world and the dream realm. In the dream realm itself, more and more battles and skirmishes were being fought to defend the citadel cities. If there was one piece of good news, it was that Sunny and Nephice did not have to worry about the climate in the waking world gradually changing due to the cold seeping into it from the dream realm. That was because the waking world was not going to exist long enough to suffer the consequences. Still, they tried to handle all these threats with minimal losses. They moved strategically, engaging in those battles that threatened widespread damage and avoiding those that did not. The champions of the human domain threw themselves into the fray, as well, guided and coordinated by Cassie's voice whispering into their ears. All across the dream realm and the waking world, warriors of humanity were fighting countless battles. The tide of nightmare creatures was already overwhelming, and little by little, it was growing more and more dire. The casualties would have been crippling if not for the miraculous flames that healed the wounded soldiers and pulled those who were gravely wounded from the jaws of death. Because of Neph's flames, the losses among the soldiers were minimal. And because the losses were minimal, her armies could do more, pushing the abominations back over and over again instead of succumbing to attrition. Unseen and unknown, Sunny was supporting humanity from the shadows. The ranks of his Shadow Legion were swelling, but the new shades were immediately sent into battle, since the number of enemies he faced was growing as well. Even Mordred seemed to have joined the effort to stem the tide of nightmare creatures, even if his involvement was limited to the regions surrounding the Hollow Mountains. But, of course, it was not enough. Sunny and Nephice were both painfully aware that even if their efforts were enough to prevent humanity from suffering heavy losses for now, that was not going to last. The severity of the threat they faced was growing far faster than the collective power of humanity, and the worst of it had not even begun yet. Things were going to turn much worse before too long, and so they had to prepare. It was not quite time for truly desperate measures yet, but it was no time to hold back either. They had to move fast, even if that meant that their plans and preparations could not be as thorough as they would have wanted. And so the winter solstice arrived. On that day, Sunny turned 30. 30? He was not a young man anymore. That was an outstanding achievement in and of itself, considering the life he had lived. It was also a momentous occasion, but he did not have time to think about it at all. In fact, he had forgotten about it completely. That was because something far more important was happening on that day. Piercing the howling winds with its bow, the chain breaker flew above the undulating waters of the ocean. Soon enough, a dark line appeared on the horizon, and not long after that, the flying ship reached a snowy shore. The shore was desolate, with not a living being in sight. The nightmare creatures seemed to have retreated, wary of the beings aboard the flying ship, or perhaps they had all been eviscerated by fellow abominations a long time ago. Here and there, wrecks of alloy battle machines lay sprawled on the frozen ground, covered by patina and rust. It was Antarctica, of course. East Antarctica, to be more precise. The place where the sovereigns had first revealed themselves to the world, all those years ago. Those sovereigns were gone now, and new supremes had taken their place. The chain breaker continued forward, moving deeper inland. Below the flying ships, old battlefields flashed one after another. Spent casings, ruins of abandoned cities, scattered debris of devastated military camps. Sunny, who had once traveled all across this vast landmass as a member of the Special Reconnaissance Unit, recognized many of these places. Of course, they looked very differently now, hollow, forlorn, desolate, silent, utterly devoid of people. Only nightmare creatures remained, staring up at the chain breaker with mad, frenzied hunger burning in their bestial eyes. Looking at the dead, tainted, deserted expanse of East Antarctica, Sunny could not help but wonder if all continents of Earth would look like this one day soon. If all of existence would look like this, rather. This dreary landscape was an illustration of what would happen to the world if he and Nephice failed. Being here is pretty disheartening. Sunny sighed. The waking world was pushing down on him, straining to force him out. He wasn't going to stay for long, anyway. In truth, his visit to the cradle of humanity had not been dictated by any practical reason. Sonny had simply wanted to be here for what was about to happen. Eventually, they reached their destination. It was the snow-covered battlefield where the Battle of the Black Skull had once taken place, and the three enormous nightmare gates that towered above it like appalling fissures in the fabric of the world. Sonny studied the gates for a few moments, then turned to look at the 6 people who were gathered on the deck of the chain breaker. These were the valiant souls who were going to challenge the 4th nightmare today. Apart from Nephi and Sonny, there were 6 people aboard the chain breaker. Effie jumped down to the ground first. She landed nimbly, straightened, and looked around with a humorous expression. Well, this certainly brings back memories. Last time she had seen this field, she had been one of the government soldiers observing the battle between the great clans. Of course, that battle did not end like anyone could have expected it to end. Effie's voice sounded easygoing and carefree, but behind her outward lightheartedness, there was a somber note. She had said goodbye to her child and her husband, knowing that she would not see them again for a long, long time, if she ever saw them at all. Out of all of them, she had the most to lose, but she also had the most reasons to come back alive as well. Next, Kai glided down from the deck of the chain breaker and landed softly near her. He looked as dashing as ever. If anything, leaving the post of a steward seemed to have lifted a burden off his shoulders, making him seem even more dazzling. But he was also full of dark resolve and determination. A faint smile twisted his lips, then a grimace. Kai winced and raised a hand to his ear. It's a good thing that we are here to challenge a nightmare. The call is overpowering. As soon as he said that, a ghostly figure walked calmly out of the chain breaker's hull, assuming a corporeal form as she regarded the desolate battlefield with an aloof expression. This was where I disobeyed a direct order from Wake of Ruin for the first time. I honestly thought that I'd get fired. In fact, I probably would have been, if not for the fact that I returned as a saint. Who would fire a saint? Jet chuckled, looked around, and sighed. In the end, her retirement had only lasted a few months. Now duty called, and she was about to challenge the 4th nightmare in the service of humanity. If Saint Cor were still alive, he would have been proud of his problematic employee. There was a rustle, and a current of liquid metal fell from above, pulling on the ground and soaring in a graceful spiral to form a human shape. Then, an exquisitely beautiful woman with flawless gray skin jumped down, landing with poised grace. Morgan and Seishin studied the battlefield for a few moments, then looked at each other with strange expressions. They were the ones who had led the armies of the great clans into the Battle of the Black Skull, after all. Back then, they had been trying to defeat each other. Today, many years later, they unexpectedly returned as allies. Morgan studied the 3 towering gates for a while, then smiled darkly. I would have won that battle if not for these things. Seishin gave her a curious glance. Wouldn't you have died by your brother's blade instead? Morgan chuckled. That is true as well. Finally, the last of the challengers took a step off the deck of the chain breaker. In just one step, he was suddenly standing next to them. It seems that a lot of fun things happened while I was gone. Nightwalker grinned. Song and Valor killing each other? I hate to have missed it. By then, Sonny had already stepped out of the shadows. Believe me, you didn't miss out on much. Nephi descended from the deck, as well, stopping to look at the nightmare gates. Sonny, in the meantime, scratched the back of his head. Actually, I take it back. You really did. History was made here, He smiled. This is where Nephi and I killed Dire Fong. That was the first time in history 2 masters managed to kill a saint. After that, they all fell silent. Indeed, these were the people who had dared to challenge the 4th nightmare. Saint Effie, raised by wolves. Saint Kai Nightingale, the Dragon Slayer. Soul Reaper Jet. Morgan, Princess of War. Seishin, Lost Princess of Song. And Nightwalker, the legendary founder of the House of Night. Sonny looked at the latter. I know why the others are challenging the nightmare. But why are you here, old man? Nightwalker, who looked like a young man, smiled. I have a granddaughter now. She's not very impressed with me, so you might say that I am here to impress my granddaughter. Sonny scoffed. All 6 of them were among the strongest champions of humanity. Their absence on the battlefield was going to be felt. In fact, the world could very well plummet into the abyss without them. But no matter how much pain humanity would suffer without them, sending them into the nightmare was more important. Because humanity was not going to survive otherwise. Sonny and Nephi needed to become spirits, but they could not leave the world unprotected. So, Someone had to rise to the throne of supremacy in order to take their place. And there were no better candidates than the people gathered on the forlorn battlefield today. But of course, Sonny did not feel at ease, knowing that he was sending his friends into a peril far more deadly than anything he had experienced before. There was a complicated storm of emotions raging in his chest, and yet all those emotions were meaningless in the face of necessity. Well, no point in wasting time. Let's go. Effie was the first one to move. She walked across the melting snow toward the nearest nightmare gate, stretching her shoulders as she went. It was as if she were preparing for a light jog instead of the horrors of the fourth nightmare. Kai followed, and soon, all of them were approaching the gate, the persistent call growing louder and louder in their ears. Sonny and Nephi stayed back a little, and the 6 saints were now arrayed in front of them, facing the nightmare gate. At that moment, they seemed to have forgotten about the 2 supremes behind them, their attention drawn solely to the appalling darkness rippling in front of them. From here, they would travel to the dream realm and allow the call to drag them toward the seed of nightmare connected to the gate. And then they were going to challenge it. Nobody knew how long conquering the nightmare would take them, but it was most likely going to be a long while, months at best, probably years. Sonny and Nephi would just have to hold the world together while they were gone. In the end, the 6 saints turned around to throw one last look at them. Kai sighed. "Don't worry, we will return victorious." Sonny lingered for a few moments, then scoffed. "Who is worried? Just be careful. I prepared you for the nightmare myself. So if you have any conscience, you will come back alive. Otherwise, it will be very embarrassing for me." Effie shook his head. "Well, we are worried. Not about ourselves, mind you, we're mainly worried about what you'll do to the world in our absence." Jet simply shrugged. "If you think about it, we survived the chain of nightmares. So what's one more nightmare, really?" She smiled and then gave Sonny a nod. "You be careful, too. Don't do anything too crazy." Sonny coughed. "No promises." At that moment, Morgan looked down at a puddle of melted snow beneath her feet. A subtle smile twisted her lips. "You've come, after all." There, an unexpected figure reflected in the water, standing next to her. It was Mordred. However, if he said something to Morgan, their conversation remained private. Nightwalker, meanwhile, looked at Seishin and sighed. "It seems no one has come to see us off. How about it, young lady? Should we have a poignant emotional moment between each other, not to feel left out?" Seishin spared him a glance, and shook her head politely. "I think I'll refuse." Nightwalker laughed quietly. "Fair enough." And then, there was nothing more to say. Sonny and Nephi stood side by side, watching as the 6 figures in front of them vanished. Vanished to challenge the fourth nightmare. They were left alone under the cold sky.